This is Don Laskin's Observations When the Rant is Due, brought to you by the Lone Writer Advertising Group, your U.S. outsource resource. Unbeatable prices, professionalism, and award-winning creativity for toughing out a tough economy. Now, it doesn't take a genius to be stupid. You'd think anybody could be stupid. Of course, anybody can do dumb things. Instead of the hamper, I threw my BVDs in the toilet twice in 2 weeks, sober. That's pretty stupid, and demonstrates you don't have to be a genius to be stupid. And throwing your BVDs in the toilet twice in 2 weeks, sober, demonstrates I'm no genius. But how do you recognize a genius anyway? The only living one I know right off is the guy in the wheelchair nobody can understand when he speaks, so I'm not really sure if he's the genius or the guy who explains what he's saying is. So aside from Stephen Hawking, how are you supposed to recognize a genius? Well, about 40 years ago, academia, business, and government working at cross purposes got together and came up with a solution. You might call it a byproduct of the Vietnam War. Unlike today, back in the olden days, guys were drafted to fight, but a lot of guys weren't overjoyed at being drafted to fight in Vietnam. So naturally, if they weren't lucky enough to be physically, mentally, or morally unfit, they had to find other ways of getting out of going. Some went to Canada with the understanding that what goes to Canada stays in Canada, and they might never be allowed back home. Some, depending on which state they were living in, got married, which was usually enough to get you exempted. Other states required being married with children. Ohio, for one, didn't care. Single, married, married with children. Even if you owned a dog, everybody went. Okay, maybe not the dog. New York had a special deal. You could get an exemption by going to 6 weeks of summer school after college graduation and getting a teaching license, then teaching in the South Bronx. On a scale of which represented the greatest danger to life and limb, it was a toss-up. I opted for Vietnam because there at least I'd get a rifle, steel pot, and flak jacket. Some joined the reserves or National Guard, which, unlike in Iraq, were precluded from going to Vietnam. That's because in the Korean War, Guard and Reserve casualties had been exceptionally high, and the Army didn't want to make the same mistake twice, something virtually unprecedented in military history. Anyway, because the Guardsmen and Reservists only had 6 months active duty and a couple of weeks a year training, Guard and Reserve quotas were quickly filled, and the units were virtually impossible to get into unless you were an actor, baseball, or football player. The rationale being that taking you away from your profession during your peak earning years was an exceptional hardship. Like coming back in a body bag wasn't. The other way of getting into the reserves or guard was if your name were George Bush. And while Jefferson City, Alabama may be an awful place, it was no play coup. I speak from personal experience. Finally, perhaps the most popular way of keeping one's hide intact was staying in school. You didn't have to marry anybody or father kids, or worse yet, raise kids, and you didn't have to leave town for 6 months. All of a sudden, the BA or BS was chicken feed. If the war weren't over by the time you got an MA or MBA or LLD, hell, you could stay for a PhD. If you played your cards right, you could be a student if the Vietnam War lasted as long as the 100 Years' War. This was a bonanza for academia, which lowered its standards to make sure nobody flunked out. I got a B- on a history term paper as an undergrad. Years later, I gave it to a girl I was dating who was in graduate school and needed a term paper. She got an A. As I was saying, nobody flunked out and money rolled in. And by the time the war was over, the job market had so many advanced degree holders, it became a sine qua non for getting a job. See how many of your advanced degree holders even know what sine qua non means. For big business, which prides itself on not making a decision without having input from everybody from the CEO to the sanitary engineer, lest an individual be forced to take the blame, advanced degrees were the holy grail of HR, empirical proof of genius. The more degrees, the bigger the genius. Of course, having all this genius didn't make business smarter. In fact, it appears to have had the exact opposite effect. How would Forrest Gump, who knew a thing or two about stupid, put it? Stupid is as stupid does. So do you have to be a genius to be stupid? Well, no, but it couldn't hurt. I'd bet $700 billion on it. To learn more about the Lone Writer's unbeatable prices, professionalism, and award-winning creativity for toughing out a tough economy, call 408-406-3574 or email lonewriter@comcast.net. That's lonewriter@comcast.net. This is Don Laskin, and that was Don Laskin's Observations When the Rant is Due. Till next time.